welcome to The Ancient Way. I'm James.
I'm Marlia.
We have with us today the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Judd Burton.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we try to kick off our podcast with a little question sometimes. And the one that we've been asking people is, do you believe in life on other planets?
I would say that the possibility is there, but probably what we're looking at in terms of its interface with planet Earth is probably more akin to something transdimensional. So I think that the possibility exists. I can't remember the name of the equation that tries to quantify that possibility. But that's kind of where I stand on the issue of extraterrestrial life.
I love it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We think so too.
Yeah, for sure.
Everything's dimensional. So
I know you have so much. The first time that I ever saw you, you were talking to Michael Heiser, which our church did a book study on the unseen realm. And our pastor covers the Nephilim and everything, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And so the content, the things that you've done, how you've researched all these things and shared it and compiled everything. How did you get started? How did you get started on that path? Like, where was the moment in it where you're like, oh, this is my destiny, or the Lord has given me this to do?
Probably at some point in my first couple of years of college. I think God had been preparing me that with the firm foundations of knowledge of Scripture and good discipleship and stuff like that. But it was really, I would say, probably my freshman and sophomore year of college, when I realized that I was feeling a call to become a historian and a professor, and thought that that's the trajectory that my life would take. Basically, as long as I was on the earth. And but really the moment for me was actually when I was on an archaeological expedition to Israel, working at Caesarea Philippi, Paneas, which is at the foot of Mount Hermon. And in the weeks and months leading up to our departure, I was doing a lot of background reading on that area of Israel. I was doing a lot of reading of archaeological methodology and field work and that sort of thing. And then I ran across the apocryphal texts that were pertinent to that location in the Levant, which is a lot of your listeners will know that that's at the foot of Mount Hermon. So there are kinds of implications for Genesis 6 and the fall of the Watchers, that sort of thing. And it opened up this whole new perspective on it. And so I think that, coupled with the actual experience of working there, really sort of opened my eyes to the possibility that this is going to be front and center for most of my life, if not all of my life, in terms of the kind of scholarly work that I was doing.
Hey, can you kind of go into that a little bit more for our listeners about the significance of Mount Hermon and what that being the place of the transfiguration and all of that? Can you kind of elaborate of even how you stumbled upon all of that research and anything? Yeah. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, the importance of Mount Hermon in this discussion is one of sacred geography, or at least supernatural geography, and that formed the groundwork for my dissertation, for my doctoral studies. But in Genesis chapter 6, there's a passage that is related to the deluge account, and it talks about the sons of God, the Menach Elohim, uh, which is a direct reference to angelic beings, coming down and mating with human females, and then producing the first race of giants, the Nephilim. And we really just get a couple of verses here to sort of set that picture. But in apocryphal texts that are associated with the Jewish tradition, like Enoch, Jubilees, and Jasher, and the Genesis Apocryphon, there's a cache within a cache, if you will, of the Dead Sea Scroll material that elaborates on this. And Enoch is particularly informative insofar as that it gives us a kind of more detailed account of what's going on in the context of this Genesis 6 event. And it's not, we don't equate this with canon, but its merit and value is attested in, for instance, in the early church period, the Ante-Nicene fathers wrote extensively and cited a lot of this material that talked about the fallen angels and the giants. And so what happened here was an exchange of knowledge, basically a combination of practical sciences and occult knowledge in exchange for genetic access to human females. And by extension, the entire animal kingdom as well, because Enoch elaborates about the extent of the sort of genetic tampering that these fallen angels, the Watchers, undertake within the broader geographical context of Mount Hermon. And so this would seem to be a rather strange, brief reference in the Genesis material, until you run into other passages in the Old Testament that talk about giants, and until you understand just how important the region is to these other supernatural traditions like Og of Bashan, the fact that some of the exploits of Gilgamesh, according to the narrative, the epic, took place in that region. So there's a whole lot going on there in terms of the supernatural geography of the region, and this is why in the New Testament Jesus makes a stop in the villages of Caesarea Philippi. He chooses this region at the foot of Mount Hermon. We referenced Transfiguration a moment ago, and the Caesarea Philippi episode, which was the name of Paneas at that time, a city and shrine devoted to the god Pan. Jesus stops here because of the events that transpired at Mount Hermon, and basically gives the enemy notice and establishes the very vanguard of his spiritual forces on earth that would stand against it, the church, the assembly, the ecclesia. And so from the first pages of the Bible all the way through the New Testament, the history of this region is a kind of background track to what's going on in the large biblical narrative.
I want to park real quick on them tampering with animals, the genetic tampering. I had this thought: do you think like dinosaurs may be a product of that? I was thinking dinosaurs, but then also like psilocybin mushrooms. I mean, those things have lungs and they transport you to the spirit realm illegally. Do you think there's any relation with those two aspects of it?
No, that's a possibility, but I think that's a different event. I think we're talking about a different age and prehistory. I and a lot of a number of my colleagues are narrowing down on a time frame for the Mount Hermon event and the deluge, and I think the period that we're really kind of honing in on is the late Pleistocene era in the Mesolithic.
Mm.
So this would coincide with a cataclysmic series of events known as the Younger Dryas, that involved, uh, for all intents and purposes, a worldwide flooding, and not just slow burn flooding. It was pretty quick. So that window from about 12,000 to 9,000 BC is kind of the one that we're, this particular group of scholars that I'm working with, that's kind of the window that we're looking at for the Mount Hermon event.
Interesting.
Which it totally fits in context with, I read a lot of Graham Hancock stuff, and it like fits right in that time frame of a lot of the things that Graham Hancock has been uncovering.
Right. Hancock is an interesting fellow, and I've followed his work since I was probably, going all the way back to the time when his first book came out. I think it was about 95 or thereabouts, when the Fingerprints of the Gods came out. I didn't necessarily agree with Graham on everything, but I thought the questions that he was asking were necessary and important questions. And of course, he hit on a lot of things that archaeology has actually confirmed at this point. The notion that there was this sophisticated civilization before this cataclysmic event, the Younger Dryas, that a lot of the epics, flood epics in the world, record as the deluge. So I think that he's not willing to ascribe supernatural agencies to these culture heroes, these civilization members that he's constantly writing out. So he's got the identity close, but he doesn't have the agents correct. And I you referenced mushrooms and hallucinogens a moment ago. I have to wonder, because he's become such a proponent of DMT. I have to wonder about the trajectory of where he's taking all of this now, because the interesting thing about DMT experiences is that they're not all bubblegum, new agey, fluffy experiences for people.
Right.
Oh yeah.
All of them encounter these strange. Sometimes they're reptilian, sometimes they're insectolan, sometimes they're like
clowns.
They're
right?
like
Jesters.
they're like the Kachina clowns of the American Southwest. So you have to wonder who's feeding this. I mean, Hancock has gone so far as to say that he thinks all of our leaders should be taking DMT in some way, shape, or form. See, one of the interesting things about DMT, and I won't go off on this rabbit trail, but the anthropologists just can't leave it alone. So
I like it. Let's go.
The interesting thing, one of the interesting things about DMT is that our brains naturally produce a certain amount of it. So it's part of our biochemistry. And I'm convinced the farther back you go, the closer you get to Eden, we had more of it in our system. Obviously, we were, at that point in time, we were almost co-eternal, because of the interaction that we were having with God. And I think even with the, those antediluvian patriarchs are living, lives at a length that we now know our telomeres are actually designed for. It's within the last 10 years or so that we've discovered that our telomeres are designed to last for 900, years on the average. So that makes the long lifespan and an altogether different biochemistry than what we have today. And so one of the components of that, I'm convinced, was that our systems made more DMT. Now, there's a reason why God put that veil there, and there's a reason why our bodies produce an enzyme that suppresses external consumption of absorption of the DMT material. whatever people are getting it from, whether it's ayahuasca or yahe or any number of other hallucinogenic plants. A lot of times what these DMT proponents don't tell people is that the indigenous traditions that use them actually take another concoction that suppresses this enzyme in their digestive system so that their bodies can absorb the DMT from whatever plant material they're taking it from. So you actually have to take two concoctions to get this experience. Otherwise, if you just took the stuff with DMT in it, you probably just could sit, and that would be it. You wouldn't get this interface with the supernatural, that people report. So I have to wonder where, who's giving, if he's taking DMT and high enough amounts, who is it that he's getting his marching orders from?
Right.
For sure.
And what's interesting about it too, it kind of goes back to the oldest trick in the book. The fact that we build our body, we produce it. It's like, hey, eat this fruit and then you'll be like God and then you'll experience these things.
Right.
So it's like another trick or aspect of that.
It's a little dangling.
Yeah.
But we have had quite a few people that, I have, that there's always been that wonder about like the DMT and how our body is actually producing it. And it's like, well, we actually have access into seeing in the spirit. We actually have access to connect to God through that. And we don't need to actually take
External.
DMT. Yeah, we don't need anything external because, well, one, he's already in us.
Right.
So you don't have to go and produce something from the outside to bring it in. It's already in.
But you really can understand why it's so attractive. Because, it's kind of who we are, the relationship with the Lord. And so you can see why people are so flocked to it. Like, oh, I want to experience that. I want to experience, heaven or the supernatural.
Yeah.
People just don't know.
But I think that's interesting about the Graham Hancock side of things. I didn't know that he was taking DMT for that. So that puts a whole lot of things in context.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Everybody sees the same deities, like you were saying, like the reptilians and people have contact and communicate with these things on the other side of it. Which goes back to like the Anunnaki and the knowledge, Like some of these things, stories that I've heard from people will teach them to build altars. To kind of bring that here onto the earth and
like the ziggurats.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I had to ask that question about the mushrooms though, because they have like lungs. It's a form of like bacteria, I guess. So it does breathe, but I always thought that was interesting, and I didn't know. I wasn't sure about it.
Well, the manipulation of plant genetics seems to also have been part of the deal, because that's at least intimated in the kind of laundry list of things that the Watchers teach humanity.
Yeah, from Enoch.
Yeah, especially explicated in Enoch.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, even, and this is a little bit of a trail too, even like witchcraft, like Wicca and stuff, a lot of them really put on a pedestal nature. And it's another aspect of, I think there's a harmony with nature, but it's not like we're the creation. We're made in the image of God.
Right.
Like we're not, we don't bend to nature. It's kind of for us. Like the world is our arena.
Yeah.
Well, it does say that
Be
creation
fruitful,
is
multiply and subdue the earth. Like
creation is groaning for the sons of God to be revealed.
Yes, right.
They want us.
That's an interesting one. And that's leading me back to, so I've read Paranormal Big Country, massive fan of it.
Thank you.
And I love the stories. I have a few. And if you ever want to do a version of it here in East Texas,
we're here for it.
I'm your guy. We've had some experiences, but Athens, Texas, where I was born, is one of the witchcraft capitals of the nation. And it is, there are so many incredible stories that I'll have to share with you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
And I could go into, okay, I want to share one story.
Let's do it.
I've been holding this one back the entire show.
We've been waiting for you because James has wanted to tell you.
I just want to pick your brain on it.
All right.
And I'm not, So we used to have church on Friday nights, and I came home. My wife and I were driving back home from church to my parents' house to pick up my daughter. They live about 40 minutes away. It is probably 10:30. And I've always believed in things, even though I hadn't seen them. Like Bigfoot's, obviously big around here.
Sure.
The Boggy Creek Monster.
Right.
And I've always been like, you know what? I think it's out there. I don't know what it is specifically, but I think it's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife's like, no, it's not real. It's a fun thing to think about. So we're driving down these, county roads to my parents' house. And as we're about to pull into they have about 30 acres of land. We're turning into the driveway. And as we're turning, wife's got her bright lights on. There standing is this 9-foot tall Sasquatch, Bigfoot being. And I mean, the detail of it. And we're not, no alcohol, no drugs.
Sure.
The shoulders, the muscularity of it, and the size of it was incredible to see in person. And when you see it, it's like, oh, okay, new reality here, paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
And it had red hair. It had this like reddish brown hair, and it was hanging down at his face,
mm-hmm.
like almost like matted dreadlocked hair.
Yeah.
And it stood there, and we just sat there with the brights on, and I'm excited.
Both you and your wife saw him.
It totally could have flipped the car over. We both saw it, and we're sitting there, and she's like, "Do you see that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah," and it turns and walks away.
Mm-hmm.
And so imagine getting out of the car after seeing that. So anyways, we pull up, go and pick up my daughter. We're like, we just saw this red-headed Bigfoot in your pasture. And the fact that she saw it, to this day, she's like, yeah, it's real.
But then y'all went out and y'all found the foot.
We went out and found footprints. Mm-hmm. But the thing in seeing it, I was like, it's so massive. I think it's interdimensional. I think it can phase in and out.
I think so. I think so too. I used to be, I used to kind of follow Grover Krantz's model. He was a physical anthropologist at Washington State, and he believed that Sasquatch was a remnant population of Gigantopithecus. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that there weren't remnant populations of Gigantopithecus, but I think that, basically I was a naturalist when it came to Bigfoot for years until I started to hear stories from East Texas first about this kind of
our people, man.
Yeah, that kind of supernatural, phenomena that were associated with these sightings of Bigfoot. Almost like they pop out of nowhere, and there are UFO sightings in conjunction with them, and they call them the sightings of orbs and foxfire and stuff like that associated with Bigfoot sightings. Gosh, there's got to be something a little, there's got to be something potentially transdimensional here, at least. There's something that's not completely natural in terms of Sasquatch, and it wasn't just one breed of Sasquatch, I guess you could say. The subspecies variety that you run into, like the Boggy Creek Monster and the skunk ape, and just the panoply of the different kinds of them. So that was interesting to me as well. It didn't stick to necessarily one type of.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, and even it kind of goes back to like Pan and the Goat Man as well. Mm-hmm. All these different forms and beings, and what was interesting too about the Bigfoot is the town we're very close to is Edom.
Yeah,
and it's like the red hair, Esau, like the whole. And that was fascinating, and it's just like, man, what's the deal with this thing? And you look at like Native American paintings and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you've got wolves and all these animals, and then they have like the images of like Bigfoot on there,
Right.
and all the stories, of the giant tribes living in caves, and it's just a fascinating
Yeah, virtually every
reality.
major generalized grouping of Native Americans has some sort of story about interaction with the giants. Not just and they were
Yeah.
often not very they were often not very affable interactions. Some of the tribes, like the Plains tribes and the Great Basin tribes, talk about fighting wars with these things.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm of the mind that uh, most people are familiar with Native American history in terms of the military depredations that were carried out
Mm-hmm.
against Native American tribes over the last couple of centuries. Um, but I think science was used to kind of to minimalize their influence on American society, simply because their oral histories corroborated a biblical worldview uh, when it came,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it came to uh, the giant stories. And so I'm of the mind, the more that I look into this, and I've been doing it for a while now, that certain persons within the Bureau of Ethnology, under the auspices of preserving Native American culture and studying it, for its cultural value, um, by sending out archaeologists and anthropologists and linguists and field people of all kinds, uh, they carried out a marginalization of Native American history, essentially, uh, and basically did the same thing that Golden Age archaeology did. It commodified culture, uh,
Mm-hmm.
rather than actually, recognizing it for its its historical value and its bearing on reality.
Yeah.
So, with some of the experiences that have happened over here in East Texas, you are the expert of supernatural stories of Texas. So, we wanted to kind of get some of your stories, things that you have kind of dove into that really, well, one that you really liked. Like, what are some of the stories that you have researched or experienced yourself or whatever? Kind of wanted you to elaborate in that.
Sure. Well, some of my favorite ones are right here in Merkel, where I'm from. But there are a number of them. I think that probably one of the most interesting uh, paranormal stories that I have has to do with uh, well, it's really kind of a Sasquatch story, is what it is.
Hmm.
Um, Back in the late '70s, there were a few Bigfoot sightings in the big country, and um, the first one was in Holly, and the creature that was sighted was dubbed by the local newspapers the Holly Him.
Hmm.
And there were also some sightings in Merkel, or south of town here anyway, and the local papers started calling it the Merkel Monster. But I have actually one of my best friends in the world, his brother, uh, and a couple of friends, I think, were in a truck, and they were parked somewhere south of town. And uh, the way that it was related to me is Terry, this fellow's name, was to do his friends, and they all of a sudden felt like, well, the truck moved, like something had been dumped into the bed of the truck, because they could feel the back end of the bed of the truck go down. And it was twilight, so there was enough light to see at least the shadow in the back. And he looked in the rearview mirror and saw this thing standing in the back of his pickup. And needless to say, he stepped on the gas and drove out of there as quickly as he could. But it was this large hominid that was just standing there, and they could see the gleam of his eyes in the rearview mirror.
Wow.
So that's one of my favorite stories.
What color were the eyes?
They were. It was the kind of milky yellow that you see on most animals' eyes when you shine a light in their eyes, like that. That's definitely an interesting one. Another one is the story about the goat man that I write about in Paranormal Big Country, which is interesting considering all the work that I ended up doing on Pan and his shrine at Paneas, Caesarea Philippi. But the goat man is just pretty much like it sounds. It's a satyr-like creature that looks like the god Pan. And these stories really span the breadth of the country, particularly the South. I've heard goat man stories from Texas all the way to Maryland. Probably the most famous goat man story is that of the Lake Worth monster, which was cited back in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. But it conformed to the image of a satyr, the half goat, half man composure. And I seem to remember a newspaper headline from the time that made a play on words of the Saturday Night Special or something like that, but instead of Saturday with a U, it was Satyr Day special. So somebody at that, I can't remember if that's a Fort Worth Telegram. I think it was somebody had an interesting sense of humor about the whole thing. But Goatman is kind of an auspicious and terrifying cryptid, if you will, because most of the stories center around some fellow working for the Department of Agriculture, an experiment that went horribly awry. And the Goatman, very much like Pan himself, is said to have this deep, resonating, terrifying voice, just like Pan was supposed to have had. That, in fact, it was so terrifying. That's where we get the word panic from. But the Goatman was said to do things like jump on the cars of unsuspecting passersby and trying to pull the roof of the car off and drag people off. It's supposed to have these horrible red eyes. And like I said, these are stories that I heard growing up around here. There's actually a road that runs south of Merkel called Devil's Backbone. And there's a creek at the lowest point of it. And a lot of the sightings seem to center, at least for Merkel, seem to center around this area. So there is the Merkel Goatman that's been a kind of ensconcement in the back of my mind while I've been doing all this research all of these years. But I think one of the more interesting stories about Merkel has to do with the Aurora airship. And this was a famous UFO sighting between 1896 and 1897 in Texas. This thing was spotted across all the way from Central and West Texas up to North Texas and even East Texas. The first time I found out about it was in Whitley Strieber's book, Communion. There was the briefest reference to this very curious stop that this UFO airship made in Merkel in 1897. And I've since found newspaper clippings that corroborate that, of course. But what happened is that this dirigible-looking, at a time, I might add, before dirigibles were in common use. At any rate, this thing looked like a Zeppelin, basically. And In 1897, this thing made a stop in Merkel, and it must have pulled into town around noon when church was letting out, because there was a large crowd that had gathered to watch it in the old, I believe it's the old Methodist church. It used to be the one that was closest to the railroad tracks in Merkel. And this thing is dragging something on the ground, almost like an anchor, and it gets stuck on the railroad tracks. And the people that had gathered there reported seeing this small man in a blue jumpsuit climb down the rope that this, or line or whatever it was, that this anchor was attached to, cut the line, and then climb back up while the airship then proceeded eastward, ostensibly to the Metroplex area and only Aurora, from which the ship actually gets its name. And its occupants were allegedly interred in the cemetery in Aurora, Texas. But for years, this artifact, this anchor, was on display in the old blacksmith shop down by the railroad tracks. So, and then it just sort of vanishes, in the midst of time. It may be in somebody's attic.
Yeah.
I since have met the property owners that old blacksmith shop was on, but it's been backfilled with concrete. So it would be, if it's there, it may be encased in concrete somewhere, but it may be in somebody's attic or basement for all I know as well. But I think that episode and the story of the Aurora airship is kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
It's incredibly interesting.
I want to find the anchor.
I know.
Get a jackhammer.
Yeah, you and me both. That's a high priority.
Yeah. I love stuff. That's incredible. Yeah.
So I wanted to know too, kind of your thoughts on, so like knowing all these stories and kind of researching all these stories, and in terms of like coinciding this with the biblical knowledge, go.
I'm sorry. I know where you're going with this.
Oh, you have one other question?
A little bit, but it leads into this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I like it. Go.
But with these stories, I know I've heard stories listening to you. You've confronted things before. I mean, like demonic, like possessions. Haven't you had encounters with these things? If I'm correct.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
But you've kind of went into it, like, I mean, almost boldly.
Well, yeah, particularly when I was in college, I was more involved in deliverance ministry at that time.
So that's what
really into I'd say the early 2000s. I'm admittedly I'm more on the scholarly end of things these days, but we're all called to be ready for that sort of thing. But yeah, I at one point in time in my life, I was heavily involved in it.
That's what stood out to me is the willingness and the boldness to do it. And it's like, what I think I know, but it's like, what gives you that green light to, hey, I'm capable of confronting this thing, or even that heroic nature of like, where does that come from?
I don't know. I mean, it may look bold, but I think it's kind of, I think it takes the opposite thing. I think it takes a Christ-like humility to be able to do it, because even when Jesus confronted these things, more often than not, he didn't come flying at them, with a lot of eyes and me. It was always the Lord rebuke.
Yeah.
The Lord rebuke. So we're vessels insofar as that is concerned for the Lord to use in that respect. Now that's not to say that it can't be unnerving and terrifying, and you do have to kind of still your nerve.
Yeah, it's courageous.
But you also have to kind of you also have to kind of get out of your own way,
Mm-hmm.
and just work as the Lord is directing.
Yeah.
I love it. We talk a lot about like the practicality with the supernatural and how those are both like that's Christianity. It's married, you know, like supernatural experiences, Bigfoot, and all of these. Like I had a friend who had another friend. Anyways, it was like a third story, but I actually believed them. But like they had an experience with Pan, like the goat man, in which Pan had walked through their house, but he left like it looked like he had walked through flour, and so it was footprints in the house. And but he heard the low growl, and it actually caused so much panic it paralyzed him for a minute, and then he actually had an encounter with the Lord, to which he actually rebuked Pan to leave. And so for me, it's like I love hearing these stories, but I also love marrying the practical of like, no, we're empowered and we can actually move, so these things don't have to squat in our land. You know, just that the practicality of walking this thing out.
Sure.
So I was going to ask you, in terms of that, like, how for you, how do you feel like all of the knowledge of all these things, how do you feel like it's deep in the gospel for you in your life?
I think that well, I wouldn't say long before, but even before I heard people articulating this as the, call it whatever you want to, supernatural worldview, the divine counsel worldview. Even before I heard my good buddy Mike Heiser articulate a lot of this stuff, I was starting to put some of this together. I was always trying to marry what I was learning in my college courses on religion and history and that sort of thing to a kind of practical, demonological approach to things. And I was always trying to marry this curriculum that I had in the classroom, this sort of conventional approach to history and religious studies and theology. And then I had what I've since dubbed the other curriculum, the books that I was reading on spiritual warfare and comparative mythology. And I basically had no life when I was in college. I was so driven, to just absorb all of this material and then to plug it into a biblical world. How did all of this make sense looking at the stuff through the lens of the Bible? And so that informed my approach and my interaction with my fellow man, whether that was in terms of consoling somebody, or if they were oppressed, demonized, whatever appellation you want to put to it. Kind of it really kind of turned my eyes on to what Jesus meant by the church.
Oh yeah.
Not only in the choice of the words that he chose to describe the church, the ecclesia, the assembly, but the way that he modeled it. Like the church is, we often think of the church as inside. It's this group of us that meets together inside, but the church is out there, out in the world,
100
interacting with the fellow man. And so these are revelations that that God put in front of me as as he was walking me through all of this material.
I love that.
I wrote that down this morning, thinking about you and the research that you do and the role that you play, in the body in general, and all this valuable information and your knowledge base and everything, this path that you followed. I wrote that same thing, and I've got notes to prove it, I always, but yeah, like right there, we're not boxed in. And here's the thing: when we know what's true, then we are we're that church that's on the offensive. It's like the gates of hell shall not withstand.
Right.
And that's what I think the value you bring to the table with all these monsters.
Mm-hmm.
We can see them, which I don't think they want us to know they're there. But the thing, like,
Right.
we have the honor of like walking out this conquest that the Lord Jesus paid for, like more than conquerors,
Mm-hmm.
and like being
Right.
his sons, the sonship of it. Like, I honestly believe that these things are afraid of us knowing who we are.
Totally.
And so just knowing, like, man, his spirit's in us. And like the stories of you, scared or not, you having the courage to go forth, like, hey, this Jesus modeled this for us.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we do. All of this stuff, all of the stories, the history, I truly believe it saturates the gospel. It doesn't change a thing about it. It shows how big it is, and it shows how powerful we are,
mm-hmm.
and how much God loves us, the goodness of God.
It's like it's our ancestors, though. It's our history.
It's our history, yeah.
It's literally looking back, and then, hey, that stuff is still happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, look at what they actually overcame. It wasn't just guys fighting each other.
Right.
It was like,
well, and even the flood in itself, that not being meant for us,
humanity, yeah.
But almost like a protection of us. It's like, hey, they can't handle this. Let me move in and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you've said before, like the knowledge and everything of the giants, you can't fully understand the demonic unless you understand the giants, the Nephilim, the Watchers, like what happened, with them being the disembodied spirits of those things.
The agreements that they came into.
It's like we're fighting the same battle, but it's changing, it's changed. It's almost like a little different playing field, but it's the same game. And it feels like the point is like we're backing those things into a corner. The more we know, like, subdue the earth. But.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with the timing of finding of things like the Dead Sea Scrolls,
yes.
And the fact that opened a whole new, hermeneutic and commentary on the Bible. I mean, it's not a new one. Certainly, the ancient peoples that interacted more regularly with these documents, but now we have the benefit of them, and we find out that, hey, this stuff is actually not anathema theologically to the Bible. It's actually congruent.
Yeah.
And that's why the church fathers were citing this stuff left and right.
Yeah.
Because they knew that, and they had more direct access to it.
Mm-hmm.
But so much happens in that 1947, 1948 window. Just some really strange stuff, and some things that would seem innocuous on their own, but when taken in a larger context, are quite profound.
Mm-hmm.
The Dead Sea Scrolls cache found in 1947. Israel becomes a nation in 1948. 1947 is also the year when Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard are doing their Thelema, Aleister Crowley magic inspired Babylon workings, which were designed to actually bring the whore of Babylon, the ancient goddess Inanna, into this world. So there's some high strangeness going on in 1947, and I think that for believers, this cache of Dead Sea Scrolls documents was re-revealed to us at that time for a very specific reason, so that we would have insight
totally
into this.
It was the perfect time.
Fascinating.
It was like the Lord was like, "Hey, it's time now.
Yeah.
Here's the next door."
Yeah.
Like, there's expansion here to be had.
Right.
I think because we need it.
Completely.
We absolutely need it, especially for all the black magic and all the things, especially like literally in today, how much witchcraft is being revealed. It's like, we're not victims to the witchcraft. Clearly, go read anything.
Yeah,
we're the overcomers.
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting how, like, when light rises, darkness rises, like something else, the contrast shows up,
Yeah.
It is a war. I mean, it's like a supernatural war. And it's pretty evident, when
your
eyes are open to see it.
for sure. So I heard you say something. We're going to pivot for half a second because I was listening to one of your interviews and I loved it. I was so intrigued. You were talking about, in some of the studying of the Bible, you realized some of the mistranslations of the Bible. And I was curious, what, for you, one, what were the mistranslations that really stood out to you that created more context that you didn't have before? Do you have anything specific or?
Yeah, actually I do. I think that probably one of them that really set me off, and I've referenced it a number of times, is the passage in Isaiah 34 about Isaiah talks about the that it's typically translated in English is that the he goats and the screech owls are kind of having a party. I'm paraphrasing here, but they're having a party at these ruins in the wilderness, right? Well, that's a horrible translation. And nine out of 10 English Bibles, and I'm sure that it's the same. I don't know the metrics for it, but I'm sure that it's similar in other languages. But 9 times out of 10, this is the translation that you get. Well, it just irks the fire out of me when people, these scholars come in with these postmodern and interpretations and commentary on passages that have just been thoroughly put through the naturalistic meat grinder.
Yeah.
That's bad, number one. And number two, they don't let the languages and the words say what they're saying. And that's, to me, that's very, very dangerous. So you have to kind of dig for this stuff. But actually that passage should read that the Liliths and the Sherim, or the satyrs that we've been talking about today, that's what Sherim were in this ancient Hebrew tradition. These goat demons, for all intents and purposes, and the queen of vampires herself, Lilith, are the kinds that are cavorting out in the middle of nowhere in these old ruined places, desolate places.
Wow.
And that right there was a stark eye opener for me, because I'm like, well, right there you've got this chimerical demon creature, and then you have a vampire.
Yeah.
In the middle of scripture. And of course, I learned after that, of course, there were other direct references to the Lilith and some not so direct references to the Shedu. But in a lot of cases, these ancient authors don't mention them in great frequency, because the audience already knew about them. They were well acquainted with them because this was like common knowledge. And so like an author wouldn't set up their argument without maybe making some passing reference to common knowledge. But they might not even have to do that because the audience that they're writing for already knows about it. So that's why you get these sparse references, but they are there. What do you do with them? Well, I believe, with the research that I've done on creatures like vampires and werewolves and revenants and ghouls and all kinds of preternatural manifestations, I think you have to take this stuff all the way back to the pre-flood world and the tempering of human genetics by the Watchers and these creatures that emerge, because we get a culture sketch of them in books like Enoch and Jasher and the Genesis Apocrypha and the Book of Giants. And these are nefarious, wicked, selfish, autocratic individuals. And we also learn about their ultimate fate, the judgments that are handed down to the Nephilim, both the hominid Nephilim and the animal chimera Nephilim, that their spirits will continue to exist, and they will placate humanity and seek to indwell, and they're always trying to get back into flesh so that they can enjoy the flesh. They can debauch the flesh. The first scholar or writer that I ever saw tie these worlds together was Monty Summers, who authored the worthwhile book, The Vampire Has Kith and Kin.
Hmm.
And it was just a paragraph in his book, but it was these little nuggets that started to contextualize a lot of this material for me. Other interesting misreadings and mistranslations, you don't even have to go past the first page of the Bible to start running into them. We talk a lot about this kind of stuff on the Iron and Myth Roundtable podcast with Derek Gilbert and Brian Godawa and Doug Van Dorn. One of the things that we talked about one time was the presence of chaos in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, when that you don't even have to go past the first the first verse, where Moses is talking about the void and the earth being without form. Well, one of the words used there, tahon, is a derivation of the Mesopotamian Tiamat, who was the chaos dragon in Mesopotamian mythology. So right there in the beginning, God is actually affronting a personality, chaos, the chaos dragon, the Leviathan. And so right out of the bat, right out of the gate, you're sort of done a disservice by these bad translations. It would help if there was, some sort of commentary or footnote and margin about this, but you typically don't get that. But you, like I say, you can't get past the first page of the Bible without running into these awkward translations.
Wow.
Of text. So, and a person doesn't have to necessarily be a linguist. I mean, obviously, training in Hebrew is going to help you in the case, or training in Greek in the case of the New Testament. But there's so many helps now. Strong's Concordance is readily available. You can dig into this stuff on your own if you're led to do so, and I think people should, because we've also never been at a time when so much knowledge was available to us. So use the matrix against itself. If I can make an allusion to that movie.
That's our language, man. We always say that we're just living in the matrix and coming to rip it out, returning the matrix upside down.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's how I view social media. It's the matrix. You have to use it against.
That's what I like. I like you saying that, because the access to the world, we have it now at the palm of our hand, but it can be used for good. So I guess the arrow by day and the terror by night's another example, though, as well, Lilith, that directly relate to demon entities. Are these? I guess these are detailed in the Dictionary of Deities and Demons.
If you're looking, that's an excellent resource for people. It is, if you're interested in delving into the identities of these supernatural entities that are referenced in the Bible. There's and really, it's probably a good idea not to just stop there, but also to study the mythologies of the surrounding areas.
Yeah,
and some of those are referenced, in the biblical text. We get references to a number of the ancient Near Eastern gods in the Old Testament, and a panoply of them, of the Greco-Roman gods in the New Testament. But that's one of the reasons that I started, that I created the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, was to start teaching, basically all the material that the seminaries won't teach.
Cool.
I'm here for that.
Yeah, same.
When do I sign up?
Yeah.
Whenever you want to.
Awesome.
We're about to launch the new platform here this sometime. So, but the old shell that I've been using, the classroom platform, is available. I've got know, I've probably got about 60 students right now.
Cool.
My first graduate is actually coming up.
Very
That's
cool.
awesome.
So,
Yeah, that's awesome.
but I teach a whole, I teach a whole class, a whole certification program on mythology, and I have two that deal directly with the culture. One with the ancient Near East, and the other one is with the Mediterranean civilizations.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it is.
I was going to share, I love that you brought up the Isaiah 34, because it made me think of, because it talks about like being in the wilderness, right? Like these Sidars and Liliths being in the desert. It made me think of John the Baptist and him, like him preparing the way of the Lord in the wilderness. Like there's a voice crying out in the wilderness, make way for the Lord. And it's like, hey, you actually might encounter these demons.
Yeah. Well, it's like the promised land, the conquest of that.
Totally. But it, I didn't, I was going to just share a story. I had a dream. I didn't know. Honestly, this was a year and a half ago, something like that. I had never heard of the demon Lilith, just not had much context or whatever, but I had a dream in which I was confronting this demon Lilith, and she told me her name in the dream. And so it kind of started, I was just like, whoa, that was kind of interesting. Well, then I kind of put it on the back burner. I don't know why, but I did. And then I had an experience where it was, I would probably say it was a trance. I was gone from this realm, and I saw the Lord Jesus, and he told me, I'm removing the terror of the night. And I saw like this black smoke start to come away from me. It was almost like it had been clouding. Well, 3 days later, I just happened to feel inspired to listen to Mike Heiser's stuff on Psalm 91. And I realized that the terror of the night was the Lilith. And it was like, I started to put all these pieces together, and I was like, holy crap, this has actually been the thing in the wilderness that I've been confronting that I didn't even realize I was confronting, to make space for the Lord to come through. And anyways, once I kind of dove into even like the roots of Lilith, I was like, oh, I can see this generationally, like in my family, how this thing has kind of played out. But I love that you brought in the Isaiah 34, because that I was, anyways, I was pretty pumped about that. I just wanted you to know, like, it felt like confirmation for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was the very quick version of that.
No, yes, it's good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know like my thing when I've,
No, I mean, this,
What were you saying?
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say like that. I've had dreams similar to that. And like even the real estate, when you come into the understanding of the reality of this stuff, then usually I've had things where they've come up and confront you.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? And it's all documented in the Bible. Like it's all real. Like you said, you pinpointed that. You can reference that in there when stuff like this happens.
Yeah. Like it's not just Psalm 91. It's like this thing is actually littered
It's
throughout.
a legitimate thing. It's an entity that is real. Yeah. Anyways.
Well, and when you consider that, easily half of Jesus's ministry was dealing with the residual spiritual elements of these things, for most of my young life, I like a lot of people believed that the fallen angels and the demons were the same thing. They're not. There's an entire taxonomy, a hierarchy of these fallen entities that we now know. Again, just letting the words say what they say. The phraseology that's used in books like Enoch about the judgment on the Nephilim is that they will be evil spirits upon the earth. Well, that just happens to be one of the phrases that's used throughout the New Testament with great preponderance to describe these demonic entities. They're unclean spirits, and so we're dealing with the disembodied spirits of these, both the hominid Nephilim and the chimeric Nephilim of pre-flood worlds. So it's the same entities. We're still at war with them. And Jesus models or posture that we're to have, in dealing with these entities.
Yeah.
So it's all just it's hiding in plain sight. And if one of my missions has been to try and increase biblical literacy too by pointing out, this very strange arcane stuff, seemingly arcane, that's been right in front of us the whole time. But because our translation boards and publishing houses that have been churning out these Bibles uh, have used a lot of scholars who are not believers themselves. They're they've got an agenda, with their translations. They're not. They're literally guilty of presentism, which is forcing our forcing some modern idea onto an ancient context. You can't do that. I remember the first upper level history class that I took, the professor talking about this very thing, about presentism.
Mm.
Like it was the ultimate historiographical commandment that you did not violate if you were going to be a historian. You don't take things out of their ancient or medieval context, or whatever historical cultural context you're dealing with. You can't take them out of that context and fully understand them. And that's exactly what these translation boards have been doing with the Bible for, decades, if not centuries.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that y'all are coming back with it, though.
Yeah.
Like the work that you've done with it, and we've studied a lot of Mike Heiser's stuff too, but like I'm so incredibly thankful for it.
Yeah.
It's like y'all actually pulled back the curtain for people to, well, one, you're like, yo, y'all can do it too, which I love. Like there's not this hierarchy that it's just this elite group of people that only have access to the Bible and the language.
Yeah, and delving into the vampires and the werewolves.
Yeah.
But delving into those, because I've met people that have experienced those as well, and it's throughout history, it's a real thing. But what you've said is like, hey, dispense with the Boris Karloff Hollywood vampire and like look at the essence of it,
Right.
But yeah, it's very thankful for you, like stepping out and sharing these things and not being afraid or having the courage to delve into all of it and to talk about it.
Can we talk about the vampires real quick? I love vampires and werewolves.
Yeah.
I really just want you to kind of
yes.
If you could just
You want me to riff? Is that what you're
please,
me to do?
you just let it fly, please.
Well, I think that these are, again, we're not dealing with salvific issues.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because these kinds of creatures are referenced in the Bible, as part of the supernatural reality that we interface with, it behooves us to know something about them. And I've been fascinated by vampires and the Bible for a long time. I mean, I grew up in church, and so I've got a pretty pretty sound biblical education. Most of what I know of Scripture stems from those experiences. But I was always curious as to what within the scope of the Bible, in other words, what did the Bible and its language allow in terms of interpretation? Were there these creatures that they believed in? Of course, as I began to camp out in my grandmother's library, I actually found books on vampires and werewolves, all this kind of stuff, and books on the Bible, and sure enough, in ancient culture and medieval culture, they believed in a lot of this stuff. And it's such a let's just take the vampire focus. It's such a perennial feature of human culture that to marginalize the material as simply rhapsody or fancy, and just to throw it on the dustbin of exploded superstition, is a really kind of a disingenuous approach to the material. Because first of all, you're talking about experiences that people have preserved in their culture for centuries, sometimes thousands of years, if not longer. The fact that vampire-like creatures can be found in almost every cultural tradition around the globe, speaks to a kind of compelling argument for their supernatural reality, even if a percentage of the accounts are wrong, then that leaves us wiggle room with, well, perhaps these accounts of these experiences in real space and time with these supernatural entities are possible and plausible. And of course, as believers, you know, we sort of have to go into our walk believing that they're possible, because the Bible talks about them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of vampires, um, I I became interested pretty early on through, like a lot of people do, through pop culture. You know, the movies and TV series, and um, reading the novel Dracula was kind of a revelation
Oh, Twilight?
to me as well, because
Twilight wasn't?
not Twilight. No. This is long before that. The sparkly
Yeah.
vampires.
Sorry.
But Dracula was a revelation to me, because the tools that they use against Dracula in that novel are actually faith-based,
Mm.
uh, which was an interesting approach to all of that, in my mind. But the one Christmas, I asked my parents to get me nothing but books on vampires and the historical Dracula, and they morbidly indulged me that
That's a good
Christmas.
parents right
Yeah.
there.
And that's exactly what I got. But one of the books they got me was Dracula, Prince of Many Faces,
Mm.
which is about Vlad the
Mhm.
Impaler, the historical Dracula. Um, and that was the first book that I ever read where I paid attention to the footnotes, and I figured out, oh, this is how you do history. You engage with the documents, and you learn the languages, and you produce these narratives about the material that you're delving into. And so this was the kind of milieu that I was swimming around in growing up. Is this I was studying this really weird stuff, but I had a biblical foundation, a biblical context against which to examine it.
Hmm.
And of course, I took that with me all through my academic training.
Mm.
Just constantly walking this supernatural material through the Bible. And I discovered anthropology. That became an even more valuable tool to me, and that's why I started using anthropological models to study this stuff. And that's how books like Interview with the Giant and the Nephilim Dossier and some of my forthcoming books that use anthropological models as well came about. I didn't see anybody else doing it, so I thought there might be something
Mhm.
here that nobody else is pulling out. And lo and behold, in my pursuit of more information about giants, I find that vampires and werewolves and revenants and ghouls and all of that are all tied up in the story of the pre-flood giants.
So, which one's your favorite? Just vampires?
Favorite seems like such a committing word.
Which do you find more interesting?
I should say that I find all of I find all this stuff enormously fascinating, but it's generally a toss up between vampires and werewolves.
Love it.
Well, I feel better hearing that you asked for all that for Christmas, because I didn't have like TV. I had a VCR, and I would always ask for like Boris Karloff, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman. I love that stuff as like a 7-year-old.
I know. I was the same way, and I was a huge Hammer film.
Yes.
Christopher Lee, his Dracula, Cushing of Van Helsing.
I love Christopher Lee. Yes.
It's James's love language.
Did you know that Christopher Lee, when he played Dracula, he was always adamant about. He says, "Okay, I'll do the role, but Dracula has to die in every role that I play, because people need to know that that this is not something to aspire to.
Hmm.
That's incredible.
This is really,
Well,
yeah.
that's what we talked about.
He was
Scary movies, like, because we've pondered, like, why am I so attracted to these scary movies? But I think the point of it was
mhm,
you show this dark thing. There's this horrible stuff that happens, but at the end of it, if there's that redemption where the hero is like, oh,
right,
where they defeat the enemy, or like, the silver bullet, that's the payoff of it.
right, or yeah, or whatever apotropaic they happen to use against,
Mm-hmm.
the monster. And I've talked about this at length too. Is that's part of the danger today? Is that is that in pop culture, a lot of these kinds of creatures are made the hero.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're all of a sudden they're trendy and sexy and handsome and seductive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they've always been seductive, but now there's something to aspire to rather than to
Right.
revile.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's inordinately dangerous. You referenced the Twilight stuff a minute ago. I found a meme that I used as a backdrop for years, that basically said this is how Twilight should have ended, and it had the two vampire heroes in the front, and Blade the vampire hunter was standing over them.
I'm
That's
here for
great.
that.
Yeah. That's
Golly.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, Christopher Lee, I'm sorry,
No, it's fine.
geeking out again. I love hearing his old interviews and stuff too. Like even him talking about the occult and things like that. He's just a fascinating guy.
yeah,
Lord
yeah.
of the Rings.
Mhm.
And what?
Mhm.
Oh, where was I going with it? Christopher Lee.
Boy, was he ready for that
Oh, I
one,
know.
He was ready. Yeah, when I remember the first article I read where they said that Lee was going to, of course, this was over 20 years ago, that Lee was going to be playing Saruman. I thought, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, he played Dracula for
Perfect.
decades. This guy's the perfect guy for this.
Perfect. And he's in Star Wars, Count Dooku.
And he was.
Perfect.
Yeah, he was. And Star Wars
And
too.
a fun fact, if neither one of you listen, he also has a couple of heavy metal albums that he recorded that are beautiful.
He does have. I've heard those heavy metal albums. He
Yes.
does have, and he also has a country album.
He does, yes.
Oh, my ears would burn.
No, not with him, man. Just because it's him. And he has a Christmas album.
He's
Okay.
such an interesting guy.
I know, yeah. He really is.
was kind of James Bond kind of figure too.
Yeah, he was in the Man with the Golden Gun.
Well, I'm talking about his military.
Oh, right.
career.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's fascinating.
That's hysterical.
But yeah, I mean, he was so adamant about these hammer films being reality plays. Essentially.
Yeah.
That this was not, vampirism was dark and it was satanic and it was the occult, and he certainly articulated that in a number of those
Mhm.
interviews. Those interviews you referenced back in the 70s, I think. was when
Yeah.
they were done. Uh, just that's one of the things that I like about the old vampire movies is that vampires are sort of put in their place clearly as something to be not aspired to, but to be decried and spoken out against and fought.
Yeah.
And those lines are blurred, in pop culture now. I think that's a very dangerous thing,
Yeah.
And I think even Anne Ross's vampires, they're sort of anti-heroes in her novels. And I'm not lionizing Anne Ross, but what I'm saying is that even her vampires knew, they had this sense of self-loathing. They knew that they were monstrous, that they were aberrant, that it was not something that was good. And to my mind, that's about as close as you can get before you step over the line.
Yeah.
And you actually start deifying and heroizing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Things like vampires and
Mhm.
werewolves. Yeah.
So there was one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you had mentioned this, and you talked about in the Bible, it talks about the prescriptions against witchcraft. Can you elaborate into that?
Certainly. going back to like the Levitical material, where uh, witchcraft was a capital crime amongst the ancient Hebrews. You'd be put to death essentially for practicing anything that could be interpreted as witchcraft, not simply the manipulation of natural elements, but necromancy or divination or anything that fell under the larger umbrella of witchcraft. That same body of laws also intimates that rebellion against Yahweh is as the sin of witchcraft. And I believe from the work that I've done, I think that this is a not so veiled allusion to the pre-flood world because of the rebellion of the Watchers as part of this larger, satanic coup that happened in heaven. I think that's why the sin of witchcraft is sort of equated with that sort of rebellion, because the not only are those celestial beings rebelling, but it's this cabal, the Watchers, that actually instruct the first witches. They teach the first witchcraft, and so those two things are integrally tied together. And once again, we're talking about audience. The audience, that this stuff was written for originally understood that. They understood this link between all of what we're talking about today, the witchcraft stuff, the vampires, the werewolves, revenants, chimeric creatures of all kinds. They understood that all of this was tied to the pre-flood world. And so that's why the penalties for witchcraft under the old law, or the old covenant, were so hefty, is because of the kinds of entities that were trafficked with in order to make this occult science a reality.
I love that, because there is I was raised very staunch Southern Baptist, so that's like, the supernatural reality wasn't really a thing until I actually started having my own experiences, and then decided, I really need to figure out what the heck is happening. But it was, I love that you said that, because it takes this thing of, we perceive God to just be mean, and we perceive him to just be like kind of angry at humanity, and it abolishes that completely, because it's like, no, they all knew what was happening, that he was drawing a line in the sand of saying, hey, don't align with these things, because they're not your inheritance. They're not what you were even created to be.
Exactly.
And I think it takes the harshness of God out, because Jesus said, I'm gentle and lowly in heart.
Yeah.
And so I think instead of having this bipolar of Old Testament God being mean and horrible, and New Testament Jesus being wonderful, it actually creates a more solid foundation.
Absolutely. Yeah, because if you just do a superficial reading, and let's face it, this is what most critics do. They do a superficial reading of the Old Testament. They say, well, look, your God is killing people left and right. He's killing all these people in Egypt, and he's killing all the. It's just another jealous desert god in the ancient Near Eastern pantheons. He's telling the Hebrews to go in and in some cases, in some of these cities, to kill everybody down to the last man, woman, and child. Well, why do you think he did that? Because these places were enclaves for giants. They were waiting around. They didn't know exactly. They had a little bit of reconnaissance, a little bit of intelligence. They knew the general reason in the general region where the Messiah would show up. And so they're camped out in the ancient Near East and in the ancient Levant, waiting for that to happen. So of course, God's going to give marching orders. Look, you got to take these guys out, because not only were there giants there, but they had interbred with the local populations.
Oh yeah,
There are serious, drastic cultural and behavioral ramifications for that sort of interaction and diffusion. Once you begin to understand that, you're like, this was a protective measure. This was not an act of
savagery,
cruelty. It was an act of divine justice, number one. And secondly, it was a protective action.
Yeah, for sure.
I heard this one time. I don't know where I heard this, but it put so much context into this for me, is like, especially when God was saying, hey, go kill every man, woman, child, and infant. It's because those, even that population, they could have been shapeshifters. And so it was like, yo,
it's like skinwalkers.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
could have been any kind of shapeshifter. And so it's not that he was savage. It was like, yo, they could have morphed into anything. And if these things had fully aligned with all this demonic realm, like, you just got to take them out.
Yeah. It's so much deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like Lord of the Rings.
It is.
It's reality.
It is. It's like it's Lord of the Rings. It's Star Wars. It's all of those things rolling to battle. And guess what? You're right in the middle of it, whether you like it or not. It's like that line. It's like that line from you reference the Lord of the Rings material. Where in Return of the King, where Theoden says, "You would have me risk open war," and Aragorn reminds him. He says, "Open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not."
That's true. That's it.
So why not actually pick up your sword and let's roll?
Yeah, man. Yeah, equip yourself.
Yeah, that's what we're called to do.
But I love it. I love it having like-minded people that actually like see the full reality of what's actually happening and like not afraid to lean into
gunning for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, you got anything else?
I've got so much more, but I don't want to drain anyone's time.
Yeah, we don't want to waste your whole day. We would if we could.
We would, but we're not going to.
You're not wasting my day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. I mean, just the humility of coming on. We're kind of up and coming. I appreciate you just being down to come talk with us. Seriously.
Yeah.
Look, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience. I mean, this material, I think, is timely. It's pertinent. It needs to get out. I really think that this is not just what I'm doing, but what collectively is happening. Kind of whatever we want to call this space, the fringes of Christian apologetics and biblical studies. I think that this is kind of the Moneyball solution for the church. If I can make a reference to the Oakland A's and their implementation of that unique strategy, but by way of analogy, I think it's appropriate. I really do think that this is kind of a Moneyball, approach to evangelism, essentially.
Yeah, I think so too. And we talked about that yesterday. Like it's interesting and it's fun to watch the church history, but to watch the body and how it's evolved and grown, like that pure lineage all the way, from on this rock, I will build my church, up to now. And I think this is a vein of that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It doesn't, I know it's termed fringes, but I feel like it's like, no, this is just actual Christianity.
Yeah.
This is like,
yes, it actually turns out that it's very central.
Yeah, like this is actually like, this is the crux of it, man.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I do feel like it is becoming more and more mainstream, if you will. Yeah. I feel like, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and people are seeking it. That's why all the witchcraft and everything is so available. People want the truth, and people are seeking that supernatural. Like, what? There's something here. What is it?
Totally.
What is the truth?
I kind of dig that pop culture has tried to make the witchcraft and all the demonic stuff like alluring, because it gives the Christians the opportunity to actually show up as we really were created to actually showcase, hey, this is the contrast. This is who we really are.
Well, it's like you can taste the fruit of that and see where that gets you. But then also like taste the Lord and see that he is good. It's like it offers that as well.
Well, and in a lot of ways, it's almost the church coming full circle, because if you go back to the not to beat a dead horse or retread old tires, whatever metaphor you want to use, if you go back to the early church in the New Testament world, people were surrounded by this stuff.
Yeah,
I mean there was paganism on every street corner. So it's I think more than ever we should take our cues from that period more. And the longer I live, the more assured I am that.
I totally agree. I've really been on this kick where I want my life to actually look just like the disciples did.
Yeah.
Like, and even after Jesus, like I want the way they walked. I also.
What you mean? You mean angular and jagged edged and not perfect?
Yeah, I'm okay with not
and
perfect,
messy and all that good stuff. Yeah.
But they just went for it,
Absolutely.
man.
The yes in their hearts. That's it.
Yeah.
But really, like,
absolutely.
I have to circle back to this because I really do love Mount Hermon, right? Hermon, however you want to say that. But like,
depends on where you're from.
How savage Jesus was. I just want to hit this one more time.
Yeah.
He was so savage, but so loving in it, where he like rolls up to the very place that all of them tried to rebel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's flipping beautiful, man. And he's like, hey, it's like my people here. Because I felt like he was talking to the disciples. Like, on this rock, I'm going to build my church. But he was actually like, yo, y'all are going to stand on top of this. Like, I'm the foundation. But y'all are also the living stones being built together.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
Well, and it is beautiful. And it's in the very wording that Jesus uses to describe the church, ecclesia, the assembly, which harkens back to not only things like the Athenian assembly, but the old Olympian assembly, the assembly of the gods. And isn't it interesting that it's repeated throughout the New Testament that we'll be in judgment of angels, that we were actually part of the divine council. Jesus is restoring us to that. He is basically telling the old order, the old assembly, that you guys have run your course. You had your chance. You fell down. You messed up. I am putting my new assembly in place of all of that. Happens at Mount Hermon in those few verses.
Yeah,
it's so cool. And then you think about like Ezekiel, like I'm going to give them a new heart of flesh. Like it's not going to be of stone. It's not going to be like I will pour my spirit out on all flesh. Like no one's excluded from this thing now. The way that you've tried to be this hierarchy and this elitism thing, like I don't play that game.
Yeah.
Like everybody's getting
this. It's incredible. It's for everyone.
Yeah. And it's like, hey, you're back in my family. You're back in the family fold.
Yeah.
And you're all family. Like I think of everybody. We're all family.
Yeah.
And if we started to approach each other that way, interact that way of like, yo, you're my brother. You're actually my healthy brother. You know what I mean? Like, not this toxic family vibe that I feel like was actually the Watchers. You know?
The Adam.
The Adam, the Adam bloodline. But
man, so this is the very last question. I've read a bit. So what is on the peak of the mountain now? Because I hear it's like a border between like 3 regions. There's like I think I've tried to Google Earth it. What is up there right now?
Mm-hmm. There is a UN radar station at the summit of Mount Hermon.
Interesting.
And it does stand at the confluence of 3 countries: Israel, Lebanon, and Syria.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. I've seen
like a pinnacle.
It's like, it's like, what are they doing there? I want to go up there. I'd probably, get attacked. What's up there?
I think it depends. Well, it depends on where you're on the mountain, because there, you could do that and get arrested by UN guards, I'm sure, or there are other places where you could snow ski.
Right.
Depending on the time of the year. So it just depends on where you are on mountain.
Don't they have a plaque up there now too that says like this is where the Watchers made the agreement?
Made the pact. Yeah, I think so.
Well, there was actually an ancient monument there that was set up during the sometime during the first millennium BC, I think. But it basically, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, which is escaping me now. And I think just paraphrasing it basically says that this is where the Titans, I think it identifies them as the Titans, made a pact. And so if that's the plaque that you're referring to,
it was.
That
well,
so fascinating.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We could go into the Titans too.
We could just go on and on.
Well, I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about this stuff, but I'll tell you, just in closing, I'm happy to come back on anytime you guys will have.
Awesome.
We would love to
we
have
would
you
love that.
again.
We would love that. Cool.
Because I'm going to say it 15 more times before we get off. It's so valuable.
And we've laid a good ground. We've laid a groundwork and kind of eased into it. It's been a safe transition. So I think our audience is primed for
this.
And
because we really tried to lay that our heart is for the Lord and for the Lord only. And even just kind of shared some of our experiences. Like James and I have both seen orbs out of nowhere. So we were trying to make it less weird once we kind of dove into all this stuff.
Yeah.
But
right. Well, and I think in a way that I can't even really quantify, I think both of you hit on this earlier, is that all of this stuff is sort of waking us up to just how much Jesus loves us, just how we have to be gentle with people, because we can't be fighting with stones. We can't be ready to throw rocks at people and talk about stuff at the same time. We just can't. People are gonna stumble. People are gonna fall because this is a corrupted world, and we all need to be there to pick each other up and bring people back into fellowship. And I think that's for me, at least, I feel more and more in line with that mode of thinking the more that I delve into this material. I mean, just in some cases, just it's overpowering. It's just emotionally overwhelming. That I don't, as a human, I don't even have the capacity to understand the kind of love that's at work here. And it makes the way that Jesus interacted with people, because he loved people. He just loved the salt of the earth people. And I don't know. I think it's a beautiful thing that's happening.
Totally agree. Yeah. Totally agree. And he wasn't afraid of messes. He actually kind of enticed messes a little bit.
The dinner party with the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Bringing the disciples. Yeah.
But it was never harsh. It was just to be yo, look here. I love, our pastor hit on this. He said this multiple times, but when Jesus had the dinner party with the Pharisees and he was like, the kingdom is at hand and it is already within you. He's talking to the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And he's telling them hey, it's right here. I don't know. It's beautiful to me. He loves them all that much, incredible. Even though they're so far, they're gunning for him. He's like, hey, I got you. I love you, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it makes me think of the woman at the well, that he encounters, is from a section of society, that was completely denigrated in the ancient Levant by the Jews. And he's like, yeah, I know your story. I know why you're coming here at night, to get your water. I know you've been with all these guys, but you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Then she became the flipping best
and
evangelist.
I'll be the yeah.
With
exactly.
No training.
It's here's Jesus. He's like, I'll be the first one to accept you into the fold. And she didn't realize it at the time. At least I don't get the impression that she did. But Jesus is the first one to be like, here, I'll be your first friend in that journey.
Yeah.
She would later realize that he was the most important friend of that journey. But I mean, study all this other stuff, the giants, the fallen angels, to me, it just brings stuff like that into such sharper
Yeah.
focus
It does.
in a way that, like I said, it's hard to quantify, but it's
Yeah.
there.
Oh yeah. I think that's done that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like in all the studying and all the research and like, I felt like I was a strong academic for a long time. Like I was like, I'll minor in religion, but I'm definitely going to do psychology and like all this stuff. But the more I'm like, the knowledge only enhances the gospel for me. Nothing else. I don't want knowledge for knowledge's sake. I want the gospel to be so crystal clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Add the Nephilim stuff to Jesus at the well. Add that, his knowledge of that. I mean, just marry those two things together and look at the scope. Like, he has everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's got it all in his hand,
Oh yeah.
It's hard to quantify.
And yet his hand is extended to us in it.
I know it.
I
know it. And then even her, Lady at the Well, slapping all those prerequisites, like, I'm not worthy. Like, you
don't know me.
And him like, don't care. I don't play that game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually knew you before the foundation of the earth.
Yeah.
Like Jeremiah.
Mm-hmm.
Like before your mother's womb.
Precisely.
Like, yeah.
If only we would even see ourselves the way that the Lord sees us, I feel like even just a lot of this would actually enhance even more, knowing how much we are actually his beloved.
Yeah.
We're
getting there.
Absolutely.
I do think we are too.
It's getting there. More and more.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The more we see him,
Yeah, with enough.
Yeah, we have to. We have to, especially with what's coming down the pipe.
For sure.
I mean, all of this stuff. There's no more time for petty bickering.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like the bickering is, or like even just the debate, like, well, is this real? Did it happen? Is it like, but I think it's, people are coming into the choice to choose the paradigm shift or not of like, hey, it may not always have been what you thought, but if you allow yourself to be humble and open and allow yourself to branch into what I believe is actually 100% true, it only creates more clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was like, it's more inspiration. There's more hunger. There's, just all the things,
It's infinite.
Yeah. But anyways.
Yeah.
Well,
Dr. Judd.
Yeah, man. Thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure.
Much appreciated.
Anything else you want to just throw at our listeners? Like happy birthday.
And where to get your stuff to, your books.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm done. I've got your books like crazy.
Yeah, but we want to link some stuff too for our people.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, sure. Well, like I say, I've got the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, where I teach classes on stuff. I've got 6 programs. The 3 that I mentioned were methodology, ancient Near Eastern civilization, and Mediterranean civilization. But I've also got biblical anthropology, biblical demonology, and the really big one right now is a lot of the material that we've been covering on this podcast episode. And that's the preternatural morphology one. That's the one that deals with the biblical perspective on vampires and werewolves and chimera and things like that. Cool. And I'm about ready to drop my next book, which is called The Van Helsing Way, that deals with the biblical approach to these kinds of things. And people can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. For the time being, I'm waiting for the day when all of that gets, I'll use it as long as I can, but I'm moving a lot of that stuff to places like Gab and Rumble.
Good idea.
Kind of making the migration over to some of these alternative platforms. And I took a straw poll a couple of months back, and everybody wants me to do a podcast, so that's probably in the pike too.
Yes.
But people can go to those places. I'm revamping burtonbeyond.com. If they want more information on the new stuff at the Institute, they can go to drjuddburton.com, just drjuddburton. And the other address that I had for the Institute website, tioba.org, we'll be working too. I'm working on the domain forwarding there. So people can interface and interact with that
Cool.
a lot through those platforms. And as I understand it, the membership, we're going to be doing the coursework on a membership basis where people can access the material, on their own schedule.
Cool.
I think the membership is going to be $27 a month, and if you want to do an entire annual membership, you can save about $40, and it will be $279 for an annual membership.
That is so cool.
Awesome.
I'll be getting me one of them.
Oh yeah, that's a good birthday present for somebody too.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
We'll put all that in the show.
Well,
notes.
and it's going to be cool too because not only will you have like the reading material and stuff that you'll have access to, I generally provide links to stuff that's available, and people can, some of the text, like for the werewolf class, for instance, I have an edited volume of Sabine Baringill's Book of the Werewolves. So if people prefer hard copies, they can get hard copies if they want to. But it's going to be really cool because I've got a team that I'm working with, and it's going to be like a snowball. We're just going to be adding things to it, constantly. So there'll be new links to new podcasts and,
cool.
Video lectures and all kinds of stuff that's coming down the pike. Because I get it, people are going to learn differently. This is not my first rodeo. I get that people learn different ways. Some people like the video interaction of a lecture, and other people like the podcast stuff and audio lectures and stuff like that. So there'll be something there for everybody.
I love talking with you.
Yeah, man.
You're so brilliant, and I so appreciate every perspective you have.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's my honor and my pleasure.
Cool. All right. We'll
Thanks
see y'all next
everyone.
time.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ancient Way podcast, drop us a like, share with your friends, share with your family. And if you'd like to support us and what we are doing, and you would like to play a direct role in our growth and the things that we do in the future,
we have a donation spot at the bottom of our show notes. So you can click on that, give however much you want. We appreciate absolutely everything. We appreciate our listeners. And everybody that's already come alongside and encouraged us, and even everybody that's been on our show. So thanks, guys.